All right. If you'd like to make this a little faster, um, I would suggest putting this at 1.25 speed rather than 1.5 because I believe I'm going to be talking pretty fast here because I just have a lot to get through and I don't want this video to be 25 minutes long. So, um, and then I think there's going to be a fourth part, at least one more part. And I may try to do that today. Not that that matters to you, but so the first thing I want to talk about is Somerset's metronome. I'm going to be going into a little bit of what I discussed last video, but there's more to be said about it. So at the beginning, you hear noises in the background. He sets his metronome and falls asleep, Somerset. And the idea here is that this is what his mind will focus on rather than the noise. Today people use ASMR and all kinds of things to accomplish the exact same goal. But he has a conversation with Mills. And then this conversation is a big turning point in the subplot and really the parallel plot, I'll say. And maybe even you could make the argument the main plot. Some people might do that for Somerset here in his storyline. And that is Somerset has believed this entire time that apathy's created as virtue, right? It's treated as if it's virtuous. He agrees that it's a solution to the problem. And he believes that this is the reason why he is leaving detective work. And he says he doesn't understand anymore. He gives a story to the chief of police that he saw this man that was hurt in the paper just a couple blocks away. He says, I don't understand anymore. And Mills, while trying to explain to him a couple things, this is where you learn that Mills has a silver tongue. Somerset looks at him and goes, and you're going to make a difference, aren't you? Oh man, Morgan Freeman's acting is just so good in this scene. It is. I know I tell you that I don't care much about acting, whether it's good or bad. I don't normally notice, but then I talk about it every video. But I really don't honestly normally notice. But when it's superbly bad or superbly good, I'm going to notice. And it's just so good. It's incredible. And he's like, and you're going to make a difference. And Mills is like, whatever. And Mills says, I don't think you believe these things you're saying. Mills says, I think you're wanting to quit, and that's why you're saying that apathy's a problem. And the look on Morgan Freeman's face that is telling you that Somerset's entire view and justification and rationalization for his retirement has been utterly destroyed. In fact, his entire worldview might have just been upended. It could be that Mills has been right this entire time. And I'm going to get to what that is here in a minute because I have skipped talking about the fingerprint scene, but we're going to get to that. And so the look on Freeman's face, just watch the scene. The whole scene, he's great. And by the way, Brad Pitt's acting is really good too. I think Morgan Freeman elevated Pitt's acting, really. What happens right after this scene? It's fascinating. So Somerset's in bed. He hears the sounds in the background, like you've heard at the beginning. He sets his metronome. He's wide awake. He's laying on his side. He's wide awake. He picks up the metronome, throws it, and starts using his switchblade, which we talked about earlier, right? When he goes back to the crime scene, you see the switchblade. He starts using his switchblade, and he was asked about the switchblade, and he starts using it as a target, throwing it at a target. What it's saying here is you can drown out all the noise from the city, but you can't drown out your own conscience. And Mills pushed something. Again, the silver tongue. Mills pushed something. He pushed a button. And the worm is starting to turn, as it were, right? Somerset is starting to rethink everything now. And this is all for the purpose of this whole character arc. This guy's done, but is he retiring or quitting? Which one is it? Really interesting. So the fingerprint scene comes up, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's just, if you haven't watched the movie in a while, you have greed, and then there's a picture. It was upside down. They pull it down and they find fingerprints. This is the optimism of Mills versus the pessimism of Somerset in this scene. Mills is like, when they are waiting for the fingerprints, Mills says, we're getting somewhere. He's like, don't tell me you didn't feel that rush. And Somerset doesn't argue with him, but Somerset says we're just chasing our tails. We're just chasing our tails. And you as an audience member, you may not realize this, but they want you to ask the question, which one of them is right? Which one of them is right? Are they making a difference, or are they just chasing their tails? Which one is it? Now, Mills is in a car. He asks Somerset, have you ever used your gun? And he says, well, never. I've only pulled it out once with the intent of using it. And Mills says, yeah, he tells a story about a cop that got shot and spun around like a top. Got shot in the arm, spun him like a top. And he says, what's his name? Mills keeps saying, what's his name? Again, cameras on Somerset, showing you the look on his face. What's Somerset contemplating? He might be contemplating, we don't know, right? He might be contemplating that if you see someone get shot, you think you'd remember their name. So if you can't remember their name, what is that? And the idea might be here that Mills can't remember his name because he's defending his conscience. He's letting apathy set in. It seems to be confirming what Somerset already believes. Now, there is among the many great lines of dialogue, my second favorite is, just because he has a library card doesn't make him Yoda. It's a really good line. This is my favorite line, though. So it's the guy who's been in bed for a year to the day. And they take him to the doctor's office, and the doctor's office, like a routine medical checkup at the hospital. They take him to the hospital, and the doctor says, if you were to shine a light into this guy's eyes, he would die. There's nobody there. And he says, this man's gone through as much pain and suffering as anyone I've ever encountered, and he still has hell to look forward to. That is because the guy was a pedophile and had some issues. And that is some really good dialogue, because the whole idea here is the city and the pessimism. That there's nothing, it's never going to get better. He's going to die, and it's going to get worse. It's really good. Now, I want to talk about this theologically real quick. So I've discussed this. We'll have 2 sidetracks I'm going to go on in this little section. The theology behind this, I've talked about this in the Bible. We get special revelation and general revelation. Special revelation is what you find out about God through the scriptures. And general revelation is what you can know about God through what you observe. And sometimes special revelation informs general revelation too. And I'll give you an example of this. If you are to engage in sin, with that sin comes a consequence. Remember, in a previous video, I talked about black markets. And the problem with black markets is if you turn someone in for doing something illegal, you yourself get caught. So you don't turn people in for doing things that are illegal, because you do, even if it's 10 times worse than what you're doing. And the idea here is, if you don't turn people in for crimes, if there's lawlessness, you yourself may end up being a victim. And who would you have to blame? Well, you'd have to blame yourself, right? If you now, it, the seven deadly sins is not. I think that's more of a. I could be wrong about this, but I think that's more of a Catholic idea. I know for sure it's not a biblical. Like, you're not going to go to passages and say, "Here are the seven deadly sins." I just think the origins of this idea come from Catholicism, or it might come from Thomas Aquinas or something along those lines, or maybe Augustine. I'm not sure. But there is this. The Bible does seem to inform us that when you engage in a sinful activity, there comes with sin, embedded in sin, is a punishment. And so, and you see this in Romans. The book of Romans talks about it. If you're disobedient to parents, eventually that's going to catch up with you, right? We all know that. Someone who's disobedient to parents, if they never learn to trust the authority of their parents, they're not going to trust the authority of the state. They're not going to trust anyone's authority, and they're going to end up in a lot of trouble before it's over with. If you feel like, take sloth, for example, back in biblical times, if you didn't cultivate your fields, you starved. So you couldn't, you had to take on the toil that God had given you and take it on, and embrace it rather than reject it. And toil should have been something that was a joy, but in the Garden of Eden, with the fall and everything, it made that not a possibility anymore. So all of that is here. So when he says he still has hell to look forward to, it is giving you a very and intentionally pessimistic view. But in biblical theology, what we want to understand is that our final conclusion, look, read Ecclesiastes. It reads like 7 in a way. It's a highly pessimistic text, but it's trying to point you and goad you to something greater. And same thing, this is where I would disagree with this guy's conclusion, that he still has hell to look forward to. He may still have hell to look forward to, but it's his own fault. And that's kind of the implication you don't see here, is that, well, he chose to go down a route that put him in, and the way I've heard it put is this, that hell is a door that's locked from the inside, which might be there might be a room for disagreement there, but that's kind of a pretty good illustration, I think, of the way we should see it. Whereas this guy sort of makes it look like you were predestined to do this. In my next video, I am going to get into predestination. Se7en does take the position, I think, that you have no free will. Very interesting. Or that's also debatable. We'll get to it another time. Okay, so I mentioned this in the last video. He meets with Mills's wife, and she's pregnant. And this gets to a political issue of the time. Okay, if you watch movies from the 80s and 90s, but especially TV shows, there's a recurring theme, happens a lot in these shows. And that is, there's a pregnancy, the person says, it's your choice, but then every single time they'll say, I wish I'd chosen differently. Or they'll choose life every time. The reason why they did this was because they wanted to emphasize the choice. And they wanted to reassure the audience that people always choose to not abort the baby, which is not true. But that's the vision that's sort of put there in popular culture to help protect certain political views and so forth. And we see this. And I just thought that I think they probably, I could be way off on this. This is my own conjecture, but I think this is a form of advertising. And what I mean by that is they may have gotten money from special interest groups to put this scene in here because it's so common. It was just so common back then. You don't see it anymore, but you see it all the time. Every movie, every TV show, just some statement about abortion. But they did a good job including it. And I'll tell you why. Because as I said last time, it gives you the idea, it tells you something about Mills and his relationship with his wife, but it also tells you some things about Somerset. But what is it really doing? It's setting up that ending. It's setting up that ending. And here's the thing. You get the idea when Somerset says, if you choose to keep the kid, you spoil that child in any chance you get. And that dream is taken away from her by John Doe. And Mills didn't even get a chance to dream it. And so it creates a really depressing ending by the end of the film. Now, when he says, just because he has a library card doesn't make him Yoda, that sets off Somerset, and he's like, wait a minute. So they go to the FBI, and this is a pre-Snowden idea, right? They go to the FBI, and the FBI has been tracking what people do, checking out library books. Well, now we know the observation on the public is way more intrusive than this. It may even now be able to be used against you in courts of law, for all I know. Heck, they have secret courts now, where apparently they're completely lawless, with lawless judges. But anyway, that problem's always been around. It's never going anywhere anyway. So it's human nature. But I remember in the 90s, I won't say any names here. We had a guy we knew. He had this girlfriend, and he was the worst boyfriend ever. Terrible boyfriend. Just why this girl dated this guy, I will never know. She was very attractive. A lot of guys wanted to date her, but she stuck with this boyfriend. And he was just, there's no reason for her to date this guy. And she met this friend. And this friend, I will say a piece of advice. If you're dating someone and they make a new friend and they decide to spend more time with this friend than you're probably not going to be dating them very much longer. Because that friend is inevitably trying to pull them away from you and put them into their lives themselves without you being in it. And that's what was happening here. She made a new friend, and now he wasn't being included. And he could see the problems. It only took a few weeks before she finally ditched him. So one day we go over to his house, and his arm is all bandaged up. And he's like, yeah. It's like, this invitation is spot on, by the way. Yeah, I went to turn on my lawnmower, and my arm went up like a Roman candle. Well, then the police came and confiscated his computer not long after that. And then word came through the grapevine that what had happened is he had planted a bomb. This was nuts. At the time, I didn't realize how crazy this is. But bad boyfriend, outside of her new friend's apartment, knocked on the door, tried to set the bomb, and he didn't make it right, and it blew up on his arm. Caught his arm on fire. Remember what I said earlier. Sin comes with a built-in repercussions to show you, to point you that you need payment for your sin, or there's hell to pay. Which Christ offers, by the way. If you didn't know that, that's a really important part of the story in the Bible here. But anyway, and so the police interviewed him, confiscated his computer, and we were just like, wow. You go to certain websites, and it's just like in Se7en, right? It's just red flags. Why are you going to these sites? He's trying to, and this is, the internet was a little bit more Wild Wild West back then. And then, this will tell you, this was in 1996, and I'll tell you how I know it was in 1996. All of a sudden, they stopped investigating him and dropped the charges. Because it was the summer of 1996. What happened in the summer of 1996? The Atlanta Games. And what happened? There was a bombing during the Atlanta Games. A woman died, and they pulled bomb experts from all over the country, including where we lived, and they didn't worry. He was small potatoes now, and they moved on. Which, they knew he was never going to do anything again, which I don't believe he probably did. But, all right, so it's just too long. I'm going to have to get to the next part in the next part. Like and subscribe. Have a good one.